the medical student who you left in Syria were to meet you now, do you think he would be proud, or would he feel like you abandoned it?
I think myself from another life, when I was a student in university, would be very proud of me for graduating from university and being able to do that, because he couldn't graduate from medicine, but I was able to graduate from computer science and do all that, biomedical stuff.
Welcome to the Newcomers podcast, where I explore what it means to be an immigrant with immigrants like myself and folks who work in the immigrant sector. Today, I have with me Hamoudi Saleh Baratta. I
Saleh,
didn't probably.
good try. Hamoudi Saleh Baratta.
Let me try again. Hamoudi Saleh Baratta.
Yeah, there you go. This is a very good try, and not everybody can say that. So I think you're a very good. You have a very good tongue.
Thank you so much. I mean, like I always make a joke that since I started sitting on this seat to interview people, like the amount of things I've learned about names and native tongues and stuff, like it's mind blowing for me. But
Yes.
to your story, in the pre-show, I was saying to you that your name changed to from Mohammed to Hamoudi, and I want to know the choice, like making that choice, like why you made that choice and what that choice means for you.
Yes. Um, First of all, thank you so much for the invite to join you today on the podcast. And yes, I when I first came to Canada, my name was Mohammed Saleh. Mohammed Saleh. That's the name that I met a lot of people under or with, and I think most people still like remember like this name because a lot of my work is online with the name Mohammed Saleh. But today I go by Hamoudi for many reasons. First of all, it is Hamoudi is nickname for Muhammad, and
Oh.
it is the name that my mother's calls me that, my brothers call me that, and it's closer to my heart. So
Mm.
I made it my legal name, and that's a choice I made because I can do that. It's allowed, and it's part of having agency, and like uh, in my country of birth, you're not allowed to change your name unless like it's very like legally. There's no legal process to do that, um, and here there is. Uh, so um, yeah.
I like that actually. So like you talked about the thing about the name and people your work online, and I think you've told your story on film on stages. Like folks know your story. What's the part that you've never said out loud in most of the story times you've told the story? That's the part I want to know.
um, well, I think there is nothing that you know is there to say that I didn't say, um, and I intentionally did that so I can have the power of telling my story. In my work, TED Talks, and my speeches, I share the story of how I participated in the Arab Spring and how I was able to capture the first footage of the Syrian revolution and how that led to my imprisonment and torture. And I speak openly about these topics, and we can go in any detail, like whatever you're curious about. Uh, but there isn't like one thing that comes to mind when you ask me that. Um, but in any way, yeah, no matter what we discuss today, it is intentionally shared so it can, you know, reverse its meaning from a negative thing in my life into a positive thing. Yes, I was a victim of torture, but that gives me resilience and strength today to do everything that I do in my everyday.
That's a beautiful way to think about it, actually, where you say that you tell the story such that in the end you take control of the experience. So the experience doesn't define you. Rather, you're defining the experience because you're deciding, like, yes, I was tortured, but that doesn't mean that that should make me sheltered, or make me a coward or anything like that.
Yes, and I think I was lucky to realize that because I've seen working and meeting a lot of newcomers, especially when they first arrive here. It is scary to share your story openly and publicly, and the fear comes from people would be worried about their families back home and things like that. If you think about the systemic brainwashing that in a country like Syria, you're taught that walls have ears, so you watch
Yeah.
everything you say, because the secret police can come and get you at any time if you said anything. um you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That because I mean, I don't know if you say maybe we don't say it because of secret police, but back home too in Nigeria, we had this thing about walls have ears, so you have to be careful what you say because you never know who's listening, and you never know who would take what you said and use it against you somewhere. So I
yeah,
probably don't fully understand the
perfectly
secret
the
police part.
same concept, but in Syria's case, you like specifically the secret police and those guys, because you're not allowed to say anything, and like nowadays, like it would be you can't even post anything on Facebook, or even like say that I like this or dislike this, because uh you know freedom is very precious, and unfortunately a lot of people take it for granted and think that, oh, here in Canada we're free, and I understand if you're born here, but for immigrants and newcomers we realize that this comes with a price, and it's a privilege that is many people in Canada's history ensured we live the way we live today, and this shouldn't be taken as a privilege and taken for granted.
Yeah. Hmm. You know, I know it's probably not the same now, but when you say that thing, like, telling my story and the courage, I can imagine it wasn't that easy. I mean, it's because the way you said it was so, like, I love the way you said it, but I'm just thinking, like, when you started, how do you used to feel when you used to tell the story at the first time? Because I can imagine you
It's
built
scary.
that fear, the courage up gradually.
Yeah, it is very scary just to think about um, the fact that my family could get hurt the same way I was hurt. They could be
Yeah.
arrested or tortured, or uh, you know um, uh, that alone is enough to prevent everybody pretty much from speaking out. But
Yeah.
back in in 2014, when I first moved to Canada, I like pretty much before the conclusion of my first year in Canada, the Canadian elections happened, and the central cause was Syrian refugees. And I was here, um, like newly arrived, less than a year, so I got a lot of invitations to speak about Syria and the situation there, in many places, many conferences, and many media outlets, the news. It is intimidating. It is also tiring and exhausting, and it's not something that is easy in any way. Let me say, right? Uh, you have to put yourself out there, and I did that because I've always believed that we need to speak up and we need to say something, and that's the very reason I participated in the Syrian uprising. I witnessed how people were crying for um, freedom and just asking for legitimate asks from dictatorship, and that was met with violence, of course. And what I was able to do is use my phone to document that, and just send it online, and just put it on YouTube basically. And my pictures reached pretty much every network in the world, like because it's in 2011 where I was able to capture the first time in Syria where someone publicly destroyed the picture of the dictator. And the Syrian regime back then was saying, oh, everything's fine, people love me. And you know people like in the West and elsewhere were like, no, like, why are they destroying your picture, and it's why is it online and why is it viral, right? That's I realized that doing something, speaking up, like I just happened to be there, I witnessed the moment, I didn't think too much, I just captured it, and then later I realized I have something powerful. um Similarly, you know I had to make be brave, a little brave, and I stepped out of my comfort zone, where I accepted invitations to talk to any invitation I got. I accepted, really. And that path helped me translate my pain and suffering into positivity, and short films, and TED Talks, and um, really building a career that is centered again around helping others and paying back. And I found healing in giving back. Um, all of that wouldn't have happened if didn't say yes to the first interview that led to the next interviews. Um, and I invite everybody to say yes, and to challenge themselves and step out of their comfort zone, because it might lead to something good.
Yeah. I mean, when people call you Mohammed now, what happens inside you? Do you still like
Respond, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, love this name too. And yeah, I have to, if I haven't talked to someone in a long time, I would share, I would use the two names interchangeably. And I keep in mind that my Syrian passport, my Syrian identity is Muhammad Saleh. That's
Mhm. Mhm.
not changeable in Syria. It's, so if you think about it, that's like my Syrian name. And in Canada, my passport calls me Hamoudi, not Mohammed, and my last name is Saleh Baratta. It's after I got married and got kids
Mhm.
and stuff like that. Um, and I love that part of me, and and my story spans across these two names and two big pieces of my life.
Does it almost feel like this Mohammed, who was the guy who was tortured and who um, told the Syrian story from the get go, and this Hamoudi, who's the guy who was morphed from Mohammed into this Hamoudi guy who's taking all that pain and turning it into a way to tell the world that this is how you face challenges or negativity or stuff that really feels like the world is over. Because it almost feels like, I don't know if that's how you see it, but that's just how it looks to me. Is like you've kind of just changed along the way, and as you've changed, you've also, the name has changed, but I think there's also the man I'm talking to has changed into something else. That's a thesis, but just curious.
Yeah. I would say that the central theme of my life is hope. And I think Muhammad Saleh, who never lost hope and kept going after arrest and torture, and kept going after becoming a refugee, and later kept on going by sharing the story on international platforms. Uh, Never losing hope transformed Muhammad into Hamoudi. Uh, and it's if you were an Arabic speaker, maybe your audience that can speak Arabic will just get it's not very different. In English, it feels very different, like Muhammad and Hamoudi.
Ah.
But in Arabic, it's really uh, Muhammad is like the formal version of Muhammad, and then you can uh, nickname Muhammad
Mm,
as Hamoudi.
mm,
So in English, you will have like William, for example, uh, would be Billy, and like Billy is very different from William, but
mm,
that's how you nickname Billy. So that's the equivalent in Arabic.
mm, mm. William, Will, Bill, Billy. Okay, you were going to be a doctor at some point, right?
Yeah, when I was in Syria, I was doing medical studies. I was in my final years, but no, I didn't end up becoming a doctor. I just know a lot of things about medicine because of that. Actually, right now, I am a computer scientist. I recently, like last year, I graduated from Simon Fraser University from computer science, and a lot of subjects that I did were biomedical, computing, where
Interesting.
basically we're using big data and amazing technology to either like represent the human body or detect patterns there, or do machine learning to identify is this cell looking healthy or
Mm,
not, train a model to do that. Yeah, right now I'm more interested in computer science and its applications, and I spent like the last few years getting a degree in that. And the funny thing, talking about all of that, my friends and family still sometimes occasionally tell me doctor, and then they would realize that I'm not actually a doctor, and could be an engineer, so they correct themselves to like engineer, doctor, engineer. um and to me it's not about any of that. It's about yeah, following your passion and your interests.
mm, mm, mm. I mean, but again, thinking about it, like if you still went to do stuff in biomedical engineering, it feels like biomedical computer science and stuff like that. It feels like you didn't really leave it. the way you just the way you're approaching that situation has just probably changed. So doctor, medical doctor, computer scientist, but doing biomedical engineering or biomedical and computers. I was gonna ask, like, if the medical student who you left in Syria were to meet you now, like the medical student side of yourself who you left in Syria were to meet you now, do you think he would be proud or would he feel like you abandoned it?
I think my myself from another life when I was a student in university would be very proud of me for graduating from university and being able to do that because he couldn't uh, graduate from medicine, but I was able to graduate from computer science and do all that, biomedical stuff. Uh, and he will also be proud of me for keeping up the hope because that guy believed in freedom for Syria and went to prison for it and never lost hope. Um, so I invite everybody to keep up the hope and never give up and keep on trying. And just thinking about it, an opportunity, is not. An opportunity is not productive if you do not seize it and take it and be really active. So be active, everybody. Seize opportunities and keep up hope. If you could believe in only one thing in life, never lose your faith in hope.
Yeah. You know, it's so refreshing to hear you say that in the sense that there's something you said about how the kid in Syria will be proud of you because you graduated. And it's such a simple thing. Now it feels like a very simple phrase, but it's so loaded. And when I just play it back or think about it and think about the thing you said earlier on about some people don't know what they have, freedoms and stuff. And I mean, I could just extend that thought to also other things in life and how we don't know what, like, we look back at our past and the things we missed out on, and we regret and we're pained and we think we failed. But if we really look at it, like, did you really fail? Like, you know what I mean? Like, did you really fail? Because even me just asking the question is coming from that frame of, oh, okay, so it was going to be a medical student, he's doing something different. So is that child or that young man who was looking to be a doctor, would they think that they failed because they weren't a doctor? But no, well, you didn't ever give up hope and you decided to go to school and finished university. Like, you know what I'm saying? And just that in itself is such a small thing and it can look like it's nothing, but it's everything. And that's really what life is about, in just the sense that just knowing that you can, as a person, always make a choice of every single day, you can make a choice to keep going, because you can also make a choice to stop going. And then I think that's when you fail. When you stop, say
That's
you
when
stop
you really
going.
fail. When you stop trying and announce that you gave up is when you actually fail, and that can only happen if you lose hope. Like you lose the only thing that was keeping you going. Like if you lose hope in yourself or in your cause. um, and Syria is a very good example actually because in December of 2024 uh, we saw the collapse of the Assad regime, and Syria ended up or ended the phase of dictatorship, and we entered a new stage where hopefully the new Syria can, be a better, more free and safe place especially after the many sacrifices, because we're talking about 14 years of war and bloodshed, and many missing people. And it's the hope that all the people that gave up their lives had the hope of a future free Syria, and they're not here to see it, but it's awesome that it happened, right? uh,
Yeah.
I remember, like, in the past when I was delivering a TED talk before, like, the fall of the Assad regime, uh, and like imagining if I was doing the same talk, or maybe a different talk now, and just thinking how powerful and incredible is it is to be to be able to share that with the world. And here we are doing it on your show, sharing it with the world.
Oh, like, man, you've got me thinking about a ton of things, honestly. One, it's one of the things that I take for granted, you know?
Hmm.
It's one of the things I don't see because like I want to ask you. I mean, I feel like I know the answer, but I mean, let me just still ask you, which is like, how do you keep going, man? Like, how do you not pack up and stop? Because you keep talking about hope and hope and hope, and it's it's so obvious that it just drives you in everything. Like, how do you hold on to it so fast? I mean, I said to people, dreams, hope dies last. That's what I say. But I don't know if I even fully believe that thing completely. I don't know if I am like that. Like, I say to people every time, hope dies last. But I don't know if Dozier really believes that hope dies last. You know what I mean?
I
But I'm
think
just looking at
it's
you
very
say
true.
it.
Yeah. And it is, thinking about our conversation, it is maybe one of the things that you only realize you had when you lose it. Uh, because, as we said, you really fail when you lose your hope. Uh, and it's similar to the freedoms and privileges that are taken for granted, and you think, oh, you have them just because you do. But when you lose them is when you feel like how amazing those privileges were, and we shouldn't take them for granted. Similarly, uh, uh, I think about the alternative always. Giving up your hope, or giving up. It's like, computer science, similar to it. We have one and zero, or like up and down. Uh, and like everything else happens based on like this fact. Uh, so we learned a lot about logic, and how to construct uh, uh, complex things based on like one axiom. Um, so if computing scientists stop there and we're like, oh, I don't care about that, and it stays in algebra, like there's all that shit like in the theory part, but the application is awesome. And throughout my life, I like I in every hardship, I always thought, okay, what's the alternative? Like, if I stop here, um, I'm gone. It's it's gonna be a very horrible alternative to trying your best, and being hopeful that you will be on the other side. And hope is not just an abstract. It's not just a concept that you think about. It's maybe something you practice and live by, really. uh, Recently, during my university years, uh, and actually, yeah, I think my daughter was born around the same time I started university, and my daughter has had very bad experiences when she was first born, and we didn't know what's wrong, and we had to see many doctors and go to a lot of appointments, and within weeks we received a very shocking diagnosis that she has a rare genetic mutation that just happens sometimes, like the diagnosis was called Bainbridge-Roberts syndrome, and it happens in 200 to 300 cases around the world. And this time it was different because it's not just keeping the hope for yourself, but you have to do that for your child. And speaking about that, I can not mention enough how wonderful my wife is, and how she gave herself to her family and to that baby, and doing that with her together, we were able to be very helpful, and keep fighting for ourselves and for our daughter. And today she's 3.5. She's she still faces a lot of challenges, but she's a very happy child, and she's still there, fighting, and keeping on going. Like, it's a lot of medical appointments and a lot of patience and hoping for the best.
Yeah. I mean, life is such an interesting one. Do you ever do you ever grieve, like you're in Canada now and you've been here for 12 years, about 12 years now. But do you ever grieve the life you had to leave to make the wine you're making here right now? Or do you think that that was just all part of your journey of whoever you are going to be today? Like, you know how where they say sometimes we just have our destinies and we go through things because the universe thinks that we can take them. So, but do you ever grieve the Hamoudi, the
that
Mohammed that was in Syria?
that
And
timeline is an interesting timeline. I think if the war hadn't happened, and I kept on doing my original plan, I think I will end up being an oncologist, because that's what I wanted to do with my medical degree. I wanted to fight cancer, especially because I lost people and cousins, actually.
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. And you know, so grief is not necessarily the word, but I think it will be an interesting timeline to experience. It would be all ego. You wouldn't get any of it.
I like how you call it timeline.
Yeah. But unless we live in a different timeline where uh, I where everything that I we were talking about applies. Um,
Exactly.
and also, it's definitely part of the journey to here. I think all the lessons from Syria, from imprisonment and from survival of torture, all of these experiences inform who I am, and are lessons of how to be patient, and how to keep going, never give up, and never lose your hope. Basically, just be hopeful that you will this all will be over, and have carrying that faith is what hope is.
Man, man, like, it feels like I'm looking at someone who has lived through some things I tell my friends that I'm not even sure if I can do them. So, like, for example, this is one thing. I always tell my friends that I mean, and I've probably lessons from learned from stuff I've went through. The moment is never you; it's a moment, and you just what you must never do is allow the moment to define who you are. You're passing through the moment. Don't let the moment, you know, define how you act or how you react. It's easier said than done, I must say, and I've not always followed it. But as I always say, people tell people, the moment is not you. And to me, it feels like I'm watching someone who's literally the classic example of the moment is not you. It's a moment, and if you just keep going, at some point you look back and be like, hmm, that was the moment. It's done. I'm in a new one right now, and I'll deal with this new one I'm in right now. Just how I feel, honestly.
Yes, it's very important to not just pass through the moment, like you said, and you know leave it behind you when you have to, and it shouldn't define your life right now, for sure.
Yeah. Was it easy settling into Canada considering the life you had gone through and then the fact that you were telling your stories about the point when you're trying to settle into Canada? So did that, you know how where you're telling the stories and that means that somehow that experience is front and center because you're telling those stories, but at the same time you're trying to settle into Canada and build a new life. Was it easy doing that?
No, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. And you don't need to think about it a lot to realize how hard it is, for uh, someone, young. I was in my 24, maybe 25, alone here, don't speak the language, very far from home, freshly out of war, uh, didn't plan my journey to Canada. I found myself here thanks to help from the United Nations. Uh, and I came to Canada and lived the moment where everybody says it's the happy ending. He's happy now. But was I? When, it wasn't a honeymoon here in Canada. It was a tough life that I had to start alone with no language or with no friends, and it's not the happy ending. It's actually the start of your journey where each day is gonna define your future. Are you gonna study and become someone who speaks English in the future, or are you gonna give up and let loneliness take over and stop going out of home? All of these things, are realities that I faced and that newcomers face every day. Maybe it's easier for me to talk about it because we're, talking 12 years later, talking about newcomers. I think I read it somewhere where, like, they think about, your first 5 years is when you're really a newcomer. Your next 5 years is when you're like an establishing newcomer, and then after 10, like, maybe you will become an established one. And it's it's a long time ago, and a lot of things, uh, a lot of moments and experiences and challenges to get here. Easy is not the word to describe them, but maybe rewarding, and yeah, it was rewarding to do that because I was able to uh, rewrite my story. Basically, is how I think about it and thought about it, and be the owner, the author of my story, and tell it how I experienced it, not how the perpetrators like intended. Um, and that was kind of healing, and um, all of this, is a tribute to my fellow newcomers and Canadians, no matter how. recent and how long they came to Canada. I want to say welcome to Canada, and also say that do not think of coming here as a honeymoon where you escaped to heaven and all these narratives. No, it is different country, different reality, different language, a lot of work. And if you put on the work, keep up the hope, you will get there. And that's my message to every newcomer. And
I
it's
have.
very cliche, I know.
Oh, it's
Sorry,
not.
everyone who's listening. Um, but it is a lifestyle that I want you to live by.
Hmm.
And it is hard, I'm telling you, but it works.
I don't know about cliche though. I'm not sure it's cliche. I mean, I'm beginning to think that something is cliche till you experience it and you understand why people talk about it. So, I understand when you say it's cliche, but I also am like, to someone who's in the moment right now, it isn't cliche to them. Because when they listen to you talk, they go like, yes. Because they're like, gosh, like this is so true. Because settling in here is a lot of work. And really like that thing you say. I'm not sure I've seen anyone put it that way, which is I've heard anyone put it that way, which is that the journey is just beginning. You're
Yes.
just starting the journey. I think more often than not, the way people talk about it is almost like it's not, it's said sometimes, or rather it's implied. Oh, you know what? You're here now. So everything is great. No, you will have to make it. I mean, there's the work the government needs to do to enable the environment, blah blah blah, and all that stuff. But you, as a human being, you have to put in the work if you want it to become the paradise that you say you want it to be. So I really like that. I think that, so that's why I say it's not cliche. I think it's a really good point
Yeah,
that
and
you make.
it's yeah, exactly. And you will not live the Canadian dream right away. You
Oh
have to
yeah,
work for it, and
yeah,
then question if it was a dream or if it was a hard journey labeled
yeah.
as a dream.
I just have one more question for you before we get to the book of questions. But what's the question every interviewer asks that you don't want to answer anymore? And if I asked it, what should I have asked you instead?
Um, I can't really think of anything because I never declined to answer a question,
Hmm.
and so yeah, I can't think of anything in that way. Um, Personally speaking, I am very open talking about my experiences, and uh, the questions that I don't like answering are like the general uh, let's say cliche things, like, or like how happy it is to come here. Very happy. uh, and I really can never
I
forget.
know those kind of questions. Gosh.
And I never forget, when I first heard "Welcome to Canada" and coming here as a refugee, and how heartwarming that was. Yes, but I don't like when questions revolve around that, and Canada's getting refugees to come to Canada, and they're awesome, they're happy, it's perfect. Uh, no, so like realism is really important here,
Hmm.
and that's why many people are working on this. We have an entire sector called settlement sector, right? And thanks to ISSOPC and so many others, uh, we have an army of people like working on these problems,
Yeah.
which is different like from other countries where you don't have these society like or community infrastructure in place. I love that about Canada, actually.
Hmm. So now we have the book of questions.
Okay.
So it has 1 to 291 questions in there. You pick one number. What's your favorite number? Let's start. Maybe we try that.
What is the range?
1 to 291. 291.
291.
Mm-hmm.
um there are numbers I hate in that range. Let's,
You're really a computer scientist, but yeah, continue.
uh, let's pick a number I like, maybe 7.
7. Okay. Why
Mhm.
do I feel like someone has picked that number before? Um, hmm. If you were on a jury, would you be willing to convict a person for something you didn't think should be considered a crime?
If I didn't think it should be a crime, no, I wouldn't. I would advocate for not guilty.
Have you ever been on a jury before?
I was invited actually to do that, but I didn't end up doing it because I think I had the travel dates at the same time,
Mm.
and it was awesome that I got invited. You know, it is a great thing to accomplish and get to. Like, you have to be a Canadian citizen, and you have to have lived here for a certain time, and then you're allowed to participate in the judicial process. It's really
Mm.
cool, and it is a right and a privilege at the same time. I wish I can do it at some point.
No, awesome. I haven't. I mean, I just became a citizen last year, so probably no one is like, your dossier is not ready. But yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much, Hamoudi. Like
How about you pick a number?
me?
Uh,
Okay, okay. Let me see. You're the first person to ask me to do this, though. Let me see. My mom passed at 59, so I'll pick 59.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your
Yeah,
mom.
thanks. It says for an all expenses paid 1 week vacation anywhere in the world, would you be willing to tear the wings of a beautiful butterfly? If so, would you be troubled enough to enjoy your trip any less? What about stepping on a cockroach? Hmm.
Interesting.
I mean, I'm down for stepping on a cockroach, like down. Like I will step on it multiple times
And then go on that vacation,
and go on the vacation. For the
but not
butterfly, I'm wondering if I'm being honest to myself if I
like they're
say that I
like
wouldn't.
cousins, bro. Like, they're basically same family, maybe.
I'm wondering if I would. I'm wondering if I'm being honest to myself when I say if I say I will not pull out the wings for a vacation. If I say that, I wouldn't do that. I'm being honest with myself. I'm answering what I will answer because that's the right thing to answer. Do you
I think
understand what
it's
I'm saying?
very brave to admit that it's not necessarily 100% what you think.
Yeah, because I do this in a lot of way of thinking about why are you thinking about this thing this way? Like why are you trying to answer the question this way? What is driving that? Are you trying to say that because you want to look good to people? Is that what you would do if no one was looking?
Hmm.
And because technically, I think I would want to go on a vacation. Like right now, I feel really tired. If I really want to go on a vacation, I'd be like, well, I can probably pull off the wings of a butterfly and then go come back and raise butterflies and try to make up for that. Or maybe I don't. Maybe I don't care. Like like
Yeah,
because
a lot to think about. You're right.
yeah. But thank you so much, Hamoudi. This was a really good conversation. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for reminding me what it really means to believe in hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was my pleasure talking to you, and I hope everyone listening likes this episode, and to my fellow newcomers, welcome to Canada. You can do it.
Thank you, everyone. That's it.